This is the story of Vyacheslav, a man who rose from being an ordinary worker to owning a major construction company. He built his business from scratch, gained wealth and influence, and, most importantly, created what he believed to be a strong and loving family. But success always attracts not only friends but also envy. Betrayal came from those closest to him, and in an instant, Vyacheslav lost everything: his business, his money, and the trust of his loved ones. It seemed like the end. But the real sensation came after his death, an unexpected and shocking continuation of his story that stunned everyone. Chapter 1. The beginning of the journey. Vyacheslav was born and raised in a small provincial town, one of the hundreds like it in 1990s Russia. Panel 5-story buildings, gray facades of peeling houses, roads riddled with potholes. In winter, the snow piled up to the knees, and in summer, the asphalt melted under the scorching heat. The main street was always bustling with a marketplace where one could buy anything, from Chinese sneakers to scarce groceries. The town lived as the whole country did, with power outages, hopelessness, and fear of lawless thugs. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, factories either shut down or went months without paying wages. People survived however they could. Some relied on their vegetable gardens, others on odd jobs. And some realized that money was made differently, through crime. Vyacheslav was lucky to grow up in a family that believed in hard work. His father had worked in construction all his life, and though there was little money at home, he always said, "The most important thing is your hands, son. As long as you have hands, you won't be lost." Like most young men of his generation, Vyacheslav joined the army after school. The service hardened his character, and when he returned home, he faced the question, what to do next. The path was obvious: construction. Fortunately, his father helped him get a job. The work was tough, the pay was meager, and even that came with delays. Many workers went unpaid for months but still kept showing up, hoping that tomorrow things would change. Vyacheslav watched and realized, those who wait will end up with nothing. He gradually started noticing loopholes. Foremen took side contracts, made deals with clients directly, and those with a knack for money resold construction materials or took kickbacks. This was the 90s, a time when you had to hustle. Vyacheslav took a risk. He secured a small contract on his own, assembled a team, and offered the workers real wages, unlike the companies. Chapter 2. Partnership. Vyacheslav met Igor at a turning point when his business was starting to gain momentum. He had already figured out how to organize work, negotiate with workers and clients, but he lacked one crucial thing: access to big money in major contracts. And Igor knew exactly where to find them. Igor was the son of a local government official, not the most powerful, but influential enough. His father handled the distribution of public contracts for schools, hospitals, and roads. Igor had no interest in government work, but he understood how the system functioned. He had connections, negotiation skills, and, most importantly, a last name that opened doors. They met by chance at a construction site when Vyacheslav was trying to secure a new contract. Igor, young and confident, immediately took notice of him. "I hear you know how to get things done?" he asked, studying Vyacheslav carefully. "I manage," Vyacheslav replied. "I hear you know how to make deals." They both smiled. Each knew that without the other, they wouldn't make it far. First success. Igor helped secure their first major contract, renovating the city administration building. Since the money was coming from the government, everything had to be done by the book: paperwork, kickbacks, and knowing the right people. Vyacheslav handled the construction, while Igor managed negotiations. The project went smoothly, they split the profits, and both realized they could achieve great things together. But one incident truly solidified their friendship: trial by fire. Once their business started growing, they attracted the attention of the local gangs, criminal groups that controlled every business in the 90s. One evening, Vyacheslav and Igor were invited for a meeting, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Several cars with tinted windows. That was the first time Vyacheslav saw how a man who had just been drinking tea with you could break your fingers a moment later if you said th. Chapter 3. Marina. By the mid-90s, Vyacheslav and Igor's business was thriving. They were no longer just taking contracts, they were handing them out to others. Now, they were respected businessmen who could afford expensive cars, tailored suits, and lavish parties where all the important people in town gathered. One of those parties would change Vyacheslav's life forever, a fateful meeting. Igor loved throwing extravagant parties. That night, they were celebrating another big contract at his spacious country house. The place was filled with people, officials, businessmen, beautiful women. Vyacheslav had never enjoyed loud gatherings. He preferred work over meaningless conversations about cars and money. He was already thinking about leaving when he saw her. Marina stood out among the crowd. Not flashy, but elegant, with a quiet confidence that immediately caught the eye. She wasn't trying to attract attention, yet everyone noticed her. "Are you trying to escape too?" she asked suddenly, noticing Vyacheslav standing in the corner with a glass of whiskey, eyeing the exit. He smirked. "Not a big fan of noisy crowds." "Then why are you here?" "Good question." "And you?" "Me. My friend dragged me here. She thinks I need to make the right connections." "And how's that going?" "Not sure yet. But I think I've already made one interesting connection." She smiled. And at that moment, Vyacheslav realized the night was no longer boring, the first step toward the future. They talked the entire evening, about life, dreams, and ambitions. About how she had studied law but became disillusioned with the profession. About how he had built his business from nothing. About how they both longed for something real. The next day, he found her number. A week later, he invited her to dinner. A year later, they were married. With Marina, Vyacheslav finally felt that life wasn't just about work. She brought warmth and comfort into his world, giving him the family he had always dreamed of. A few years later, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. When the time came to think about their future, they made a decision that many wealthy Russians of that time dreamed of. They sent their children abroad to study. They chose Canada, a country with excellent education and a stable life. It was the beginning of what Vyacheslav believed was true happiness. But he had no idea that everything he had built would one day turn against him. Chapter 4. The beginning of the end. By the early 2000s, Vyacheslav and Igor had become some of the most influential real estate developers in the region. Their company built residential complexes, office buildings, and luxury cottages. They had learned how to work with the authorities, knew who to bribe and how much to pay to secure the best plots for construction. Their latest project was a modern high-rise apartment building in the city center, sleek facades, spacious apartments, and a private parking lot. The marketing campaign was flawless, flashy ads, attractive mortgage deals. Sales were booming. Vyacheslav was pleased, another successful project, another step toward solidifying their empire. But just a few months after residents moved in, tragedy struck. The blaze erupted late at night, when most residents were asleep. According to the official report, the fire started due to a short circuit in one of the upper-floor apartments. Flames spread rapidly, consuming neighboring units and soon engulfing an entire section of the building. Panicked residents rushed to the stairwells, only to find them filled with thick smoke. The emergency exits, which were promised in the project plans, were inaccessible. Firefighters arrived quickly but couldn't start extinguishing the flames immediately. There was no water in the fire suppression system. Some residents tried to escape by running onto their balconies, while others jumped, desperately trying to survive. The final toll was devastating. Several people lost their lives, including children. The city was in shock. Soon, questions started surfacing in the media. Why did the building catch fire so quickly? Why didn't the fire safety systems work? Who was responsible for the inspections? Then, even darker truths emerged. The building had been constructed with serious violations. Cheap, highly flammable insulation materials had been used. And the fire suppression system was installed just for show. On paper, everything was perfect, but in reality, no one had ever intended to make it functional. For Vyacheslav, this was the first real blow. He knew that construction always involved compromises, but he never expected one of them to lead to such a catastrophe. He tried to find out who was to blame: the contractors, the fire safety inspectors, Igor. But the authorities had one crucial question: who had signed the final approval documents, and the signature was his. Chapter 5. The collapse. After the fire, the city demanded answers. Journalists, investigators, and the families of the victims all wanted to know who was responsible. An official investigation began, and alarming facts quickly surfaced: building code violations, forged documents, and bribes paid to officials for project approvals. For Vyacheslav, it was a shock. Yes, he knew that the construction business required certain adjustments to survive, but he had always believed his projects were within the bounds of acceptable risk. He never thought his buildings could kill people, but the authorities didn't care. Betrayal. The first arrests started within weeks. Contractors, government officials who signed off on the project, one by one, they were taken into custody. And then they came for Vyacheslav. He knew the situation was serious, but he still believed he had a way out. Igor promised to help. Everything is under control, he reassured him. We'll sort this out. But as the investigation progressed, Vyacheslav started to realize he was becoming the scapegoat. Officials distanced themselves, contractors gave testimonies against him, and Igor. Igor was avoiding him, always too busy to meet. Then came the final blow: case materials were leaked to the press. Someone handed over documents, audio recordings, and bank statements. Vyacheslav's name was everywhere, and Igor? His name was barely mentioned. That was when Vyacheslav finally understood: his friend and partner had been preparing his escape plan for a long time. And that plan didn't include him. Chapter 6. The final blow. Vyacheslav had always been a man who sensed the smallest changes. In business, he could immediately tell when a partner was hiding something. In life, he knew when people were lying to him, but there was one truth he didn't want to see. After the fire and the start of the investigation, Marina changed. At first, it seemed natural: constant stress, pressure from the media, fear of the future. She became distant, colder, avoiding conversations. When he came home, she was always busy, talking to the kids over video calls, meeting with friends, or simply saying she was too tired. And then came the feeling that she was lying. A suspicion. One night, Vyacheslav woke up to find Marina missing from their bed. It was odd, but he chose not to overthink it. She returned an hour later. He didn't ask, but he remembered. Then, other small details started to repeat: late returns, vague explanations, secretive phone calls. One evening, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. There was no lock. He hadn't planned to go through her messages, but his eyes caught the latest notification: I miss you. How is he? The sender, Igor. A truth he didn't want to know: Vyacheslav was not an impulsive man. He didn't confront her, didn't smash the phone, didn't demand an explanation. Instead, he decided to see it for himself. The next day, he told Marina he was leaving for a business trip. He had his driver take him to another part of the city, then walked back home on foot. 2 hours later, a car pulled up. Igor. He entered the house as if he belonged there. Vyacheslav didn't know how long he sat in his car before he forced himself to move. When he opened the door, he saw exactly what he already knew: Marina and Igor. His wife. His best friend. The two people he had trusted the most. They didn't even hear him walk in. Chapter 7. The point of no return. Vyacheslav stood in the doorway and watched. They were laughing, talking about something, completely unaware that he was there. Marina looked the way she hadn't with him in a long time: relaxed, happy. Igor sat close beside her, his hand resting casually on her knee. Vyacheslav took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath his foot. They froze. Marina turned sharply, her face twisting in fear. Igor tensed but quickly composed himself, standing up with a strained smile. Slava, you. How? I thought you left. Vyacheslav remained silent. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel: rage, pain, emptiness. It all blurred together. Slava, wait, Marina jumped up, her voice shaking. This isn't what you think. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh. And what do I think? Let's talk, Igor said, stepping forward. Talk. Vyacheslav repeated, his fists clenching. You want to explain how you've been screwing my wife behind my back? Igor frowned but didn't look scared. I never wanted it to happen this way. Didn't want to. Vyacheslav's voice cracked. You slept with her behind my back. You betrayed me. Slava. Marina reached out to touch him, but he pulled away. Don't touch me. For a moment, there was silence, then Vyacheslav turned and walked out the door. Marina was shouting after him. Igor was saying something, but he wasn't listening. He just walked, not caring where he was going. Something inside him was burning. But he couldn't tell what it was: rage, despair, or the realization that his life had finally fallen apart. Chapter 8. The final decision. Vyacheslav didn't remember how he ended up at the office. The last few hours had passed in a haze. He had just walked through dark streets, oblivious to passing cars, past closed storefronts where his hollow reflection stared back at him. The city was empty, cold, indifferent. He entered the company building, past security, and took the elevator to his floor. His office looked the same as always: an imposing oak desk, a leather chair, a safe in the corner, a large painting on the wall. This was where he had once made decisions, signed million-dollar contracts. Felt like he owned the world. Now, none of it mattered. He sat in his chair, running his hand across the polished surface of the desk. There was no rage, no panic, not even fear. Only emptiness, the point of no return, betrayal. It was everywhere: his best friend, his wife, his business, which was already collapsing like a house of cards. He was nothing. Everything he had built had been taken from him. Vyacheslav opened a desk drawer and pulled out a knife. Heavy, with a smooth wooden handle. Vyacheslav opened a desk drawer and pulled out a knife. Heavy, with a smooth wooden handle. He had once used it for small tasks, opening envelopes, cutting through packaging. Now, it would serve a different purpose. He knew that a gunshot to the head might not be instant. Hanging, too slow. Poison, unreliable. But a knife. A knife to the heart was fast. Certain. He stood up and placed the knife blade up, pressing the handle firmly against the edge of the desk. He took a deep breath, then, slowly, he lowered himself onto the blade. The pain was immediate, searing. His body jerked, but there was no turning back. Silence. Blood trickled down the steel, dripping onto the floor. Vyacheslav closed his eyes. This was the end, or was it just the beginning? Chapter 9. Igor's fall. Vyacheslav's death became a sensation. The news spread instantly. A successful businessman, one of the city's largest developers, had taken his own life in his office. Headlines screamed tragedy, while social media buzzed with speculation. But the real storm began later. A week after his death, several major news outlets received anonymous packages. Inside were copies of documents, recordings of phone calls, and bank statements. All of them pointed to one thing: Igor had betrayed Vyacheslav not only as a friend but also as a business partner. The evidence, the recordings, contained negotiations with officials about rigging construction contracts. The documents proved that Igor had siphoned money from the company months before the fire. He had bribed inspectors and ignored safety violations. And the most damning piece of evidence, a recording from the day before Vyacheslav's death: everything is going according to plan. He'll drown in this mess, and no one will save him. It was Igor's voice. When journalists published the materials, all hell broke loose. The investigative committee reopened the case. Authorities raided the company. Bank accounts were frozen. Igor realized his days were numbered. The end of the road. He tried to run. Bought a ticket for a late-night flight, gathered as much cash as he could, but at the airport, they were already waiting for him. Arrest. Cameras. Faces of employees who had once trusted him. As he was led down the corridor, a journalist shouted, "Is it true that you drove Vyacheslav to suicide?" He didn't answer. Just lowered his head, and months later, during his trial, the prosecutor read out the final piece of evidence from the anonymous package. It was a note found in Vyacheslav's office. "You betrayed me. But the truth always finds its way." Chapter 10. Marina, widow and outcast, after Vyacheslav's death. Marina's life collapsed. At first, she tried to play the role of a grieving widow. She appeared in dark glasses, gave sorrowful statements to the press, and said she couldn't believe what had happened. But when journalists started digging deeper, when call recordings and documents surfaced, everything changed. Now, people didn't meet her with sympathy, but with contempt. Outcast. First, Marina stopped receiving invitations to social events. Then, those who once called her a friend cut off all contact. The wife of a successful businessman, accustomed to luxury, suddenly found herself unwanted. When Igor was arrested, she was summoned for questioning. She swore she knew nothing about his fraud schemes. But the investigators looked at her with cold indifference. "And did you know about the affair?" One of them suddenly asked. She froze. That has nothing to do with the case." "Maybe not. But the public will be interested." And sure enough, soon the media exposed details of her relationship with Igor. Now, the comments under news articles called her names: the traitor's mistress, the woman who destroyed a family, Marina, the Black Widow. She tried to shut herself off from the world, locking herself in her apartment, but even there, she found no peace. Someone vandalized her door with insults. Flyers with her photo and the words, "You killed him," appeared in her mailbox. Chapter 11. The last night, Marina left the city at night. When the streets were empty, she gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The farther she drove from her old life, the stronger the fear grew. She didn't know where she was going. All that mattered was getting away. Outside, the silhouettes of trees blurred past. The streetlights had long been left behind, and the road stretched into darkness. And then, on the empty highway, right in front of her, someone was standing, a man's figure in the shadows, motionless, as if waiting for her. Marina slammed the brakes. The tires screeched as the car skidded. When she looked again, there was no one there, an empty road. Silence. Her heart pounded in her chest, a ghost from the past. She forced herself to breathe, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly. Nerves. Just nerves. But when she glanced at the rearview mirror, her blood turned to ice. Vyacheslav was sitting in the back seat, pale, his eyes hollow, wearing the same shirt he had died in. Marina screamed. She lunged for the door, but suddenly, the engine died. Silence. "You betrayed me," he said softly. She couldn't breathe. Her throat tightened with fear. "Slava. It wasn't me. It was all Igor." Lies. A cold chill ran down her spine. Vyacheslav didn't move, but his voice was closer now, as if he was whispering right into her ear. "You destroyed everything. Did you really think you could escape?" Tears streamed down her face. "Forgive me. Please." Silence, and then, the car started again. Marina gasped and turned around. Empty. She was alone again, but when she looked in the rearview mirror, there was writing on the glass from the inside: "You won't escape." The letters were drawn in something red. Marina slammed her foot on the gas and sped forward. She never looked in the mirror again. Chapter 12. The inevitable. Marina sped down the empty highway, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of the engine. "It's just my nerves. Just exhaustion," she kept telling herself, but she knew she was lying. Fear gripped her throat. She tried to convince herself that Vyacheslav's ghost was just her imagination, but her eyes kept flicking to the mirror. There was no longer a shadowy figure or ominous writing, just the dark road and... What was that? Headlights, too bright. Too close. Someone was following her, the pursuer. Marina slammed her foot on the gas. The speedometer climbed higher and higher, but the lights behind her were gaining. The car chasing her moved unnaturally, gliding smoothly over the road, ignoring bumps and turns as if floating. Panic surged through her as she glanced at the mirror again. Through the blinding headlights, she thought she saw the driver, Vyacheslav, pale face. Empty eyes. This is impossible. The headlights flashed, flooding her vision with a blinding white light. Marina screamed and instinctively yanked the steering wheel. She lost control. The last turn, the car veered off the road, flipped multiple times, crashing through trees before plummeting into a deep ravine. The screech of metal. A dull impact. Silence. Marina barely opened her eyes. Pain shot through her body, her chest felt crushed. She realized she was pinned between the seat and the warped dashboard. Blood trickled down her forehead. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a faint crackling sound. No, not crackling, footsteps. Marina's breath caught. She tried to move but couldn't. The footsteps drew closer. A dark figure loomed outside the shattered window. I told you. You won't escape. It was Vyacheslav, and in that moment, flames erupted. Fire engulfed the car, licking at the wreckage, filling the air with heat and smoke. Marina screamed, but no one heard her. Epilogue. When rescuers found the car in the morning, all that remained was a charred shell. Marina's body was burned beyond recognition. The police ruled it an accident, crash, fuel ignition, but one of the firefighters noticed something strange. On the scorched rear window, among the soot, letters had been drawn. No one could explain what they were written with. But the message was clear: now you're with me.